The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings. I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for Stardate -25-2102.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about mission readiness as it pertains to cardio training. You can see I'm wearing my LUs today, no longer my SDUs, which tells you that we're going to be doing some physical stuff in today's briefing. But before we do that, let's do the housekeeping, which is to say that we record these sessions every Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. We record them live in Discord in our screening room channel. So if you are an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you're welcome to join us here. You can participate in the chat. If you're not an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you can join us on YouTube on our channel there. We stream there live usually. It looks like it's working today, and hopefully that'll work there. You're welcome to drop comments or questions in the chat there. Hopefully I will see them. If you're not able to join us in real time, which is pretty likely, but given that it's an awkward time in the middle of the day on Tuesday, you're welcome to watch the video after the fact on YouTube. Drop a comment or a question in the comment section there. You can reach out via Discord or just about any other communication system known to man except for the bad ones. And if you've got something you need to get to me, you can do that. I will do my best to answer your question there and then, or if not, I might use it as an inspiration for a future video. So please make yourself known. Oh, I see one of my cats has already joined us. That's Harris over there in that bed. I'm hoping that placing that bed in that spot will mitigate the inevitable interference from these boys. So we'll see. All right. But why am I here? Who are we? What is the Dauntless? Why am I an admiral? The Dauntless is a future-focused advocacy and action group that is, at its core, a Star Trek fan club. We are a chapter of Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is the world's largest fan-run, organized Star Trek fan community. And we are one of hundreds of chapters in dozens of countries around the world. Specifically, the Dauntless is the chapter based in Cape Town, South Africa, but most of our activity takes place, or at least is coordinated online on our Discord server. So that means we're able to accommodate members all over the place, not only in Cape Town, not only in South Africa, but just about anywhere. All right. Brings us to the purpose of today's briefing, which is mission readiness as it relates to cardio training. So first, let us recapitulate what I mean by mission readiness. So mission readiness is an instantiation of our standing orders here aboard the Dauntless, which is to, or our big mission is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's idyllic future of humankind as depicted in Star Trek to Africa and the Middle East. That is our region, Region 8, where we operate. And that is clarified in a number of standing orders. One of those standing orders is that we are expected to, standing order number 2, we are required and obligated to undertake initiatives to make the world more like that future, that optimistic future in which most of the problems that we know and recognize today have been, if not completely, then close to completely solved. And one of the sub-clarifications of that standing order is that we are expected to do what we can to make ourselves better, to improve ourselves so that we are more capable of serving that mission. Now, that directive is the doctrine of mission readiness, being ready for the mission. And that mission readiness doctrine or philosophy, that might be a little grandiose, discipline, I prefer that. The discipline of mission readiness is broken down into 3 pillars, and that is physical, mental, and spiritual. Each one of those they're actually part of the whole because they reflect 3 different aspects of the same organism. They are interrelated. They're kind of inseparable. You can't have one without the other. You can't work on one without working on the other. but it's useful from a practical point of view to think of them as being distinct from one another. And so for today, we're going to be focusing primarily on the physical side of things, specifically as it relates to cardiovascular training. Now, if you are up to date, you'll remember that a couple of weeks ago, we did one of these on resistance training, which is the practice of lifting heavy things so as to build your skeletal muscle to make yourself stronger. Cardiovascular training is the other very important physical training modality that does other things. And we'll go into today what those things are. So let us start by reviewing the integrated system of the three pillars. So we've got the physical, which is the body's mechanical and metabolic capability to perform demanding tasks reliably and without injury. So being physically able to do what is asked of us. There's the cognitive pillar, which is the mind's ability to learn, analyze, plan, interpret data, and make effective decisions under pressure. So that's our ability to think, strategize, and the skills that we possess. And then there is the spiritual or emotional pillar, which is the psychological resilience to maintain focus, to manage motivation, to tolerate discomfort, and to execute the mission despite friction. So again, these are not isolated. They are intensely interwoven and inseparably so. You are one organism, one human being, and taxing one pillar inevitably draws from the other two pillars because they are not separate from one another. It's just useful from a practical point of view to think of them as being distinct. Now, as I said, cardiovascular training, or just cardio for short, where that belongs is principally in the physical pillar. But beyond just that, but it lives in the physical space because while resistance training builds the structural integrity of your frame, the cardiovascular training operates differently across the three different pillars, and it does it in the following way, right? So firstly, the physical pillar. How does cardio relate to the physical pillar? So cardio, the word cardiovascular literally translates to of the heart and blood vessels. So cardio is your cardiac equipment, is your heart, and your vascular is your vessels. And so that obviously relates to the heart itself, your central pump, your cardiac adaptations. And what you're doing with cardio training is you are trying to affect your stroke volume. So while resistance training thickens the heart walls to push against high pressure, so it makes the walls of your heart, the physical muscle of your heart, they resist against the pressure of your blood. Remember, we spoke about blood pressure extensively in our blood donation briefing from a few weeks ago. Cardiovascular training stretches and expands the heart's chambers. So the resistance training thickens the muscular walls, the muscular part of the heart. The cardiovascular training helps to make the whole thing more flexible, specifically the left ventricle, which is relevant for pumping oxygenated blood, but really the whole thing is affected. And it allows the heart to pump a larger volume of blood with every single beat. So resistance training makes the pump harder. Cardiovascular training makes the expansion bigger. So it lets more blood in and can squeeze more blood out. What that does is it affects your resting heart rate. Now, because the heart is moving more blood per pump, it doesn't need to beat as often, right? It's getting the same work done with fewer beats. Your lower resting heart rate means that your central engine, which is your heart, is operating with extreme efficiency when it's idle, saving millions of beats and immense wear and tear over a lifetime. You can think of it this way: your heart is a machine, like the engine of your car is only good for so many revolutions, however many million or billion revolutions during the lifespan of that engine, before it'll eventually just give out. Your heart is also only good for so many beats. It's a very large number, but it can only handle so many beats. By combining resistance and cardiovascular training, by increasing the efficiency of your heart, it means it literally has to beat fewer times in order to get its work done. Resting heart rate is literally the number of times your heart has to beat while you are at rest. Normal resting heart rate for an average human is somewhere between 60 and 70 beats per minute. As your cardiovascular fitness increases, you can drop that down to 50 or even below 50 beats per minute. So you're literally doing less things with your heart when you are at rest, which is ultimately going to extend your life and your health span. Second aspect is the supply lines, the vascular expansion. So this is the vessel part, cardiovascular. First thing you're doing is capillarization. So cardio doesn't just make your heart stronger, it literally builds new infrastructure. So sustained aerobic training, and I'll explain in a minute what aerobic training means, stimulates the creation of new capillaries around your muscle fibers. Capillaries are tiny little blood vessels, and it stimulates the production of new blood vessels to feed additional blood into your muscle fibers. Gives your blood more channels, more roads, more places to go, which then means that it can move on to delivery and extraction. So by increasing your capillary density, increasing the number of capillaries there are, you're widening the supply lines. And this allows for a massive increase in the amount of oxygen and nutrient-rich blood. So remember, blood is the delivery mechanism by which things like fuel, chemical fuel, and oxygen are delivered to the various tissues throughout your body, but in this case, specifically your muscles, can then be delivered directly to the working muscles, while simultaneously improving the body's ability to extract and clear metabolic waste products like lactic acid. If you think of your blood vessels as being the roads in a city, the more roads and alleys there are, the easier it is for the little trucks getting in and out of the various different corners of the city to make deliveries, to drop off the good stuff, but also for the rubbish trucks to get in there to take the bad stuff out, right? The more roads you have in your muscles, the more efficiently you're able to get stuff to where it needs to be and then get the bad stuff out again. Delivery and extraction. You're literally creating more vessels in response to cardiovascular training. Then there's cellular efficiency. So this is a very interesting effect. And so this is something I actually only learned about while I was doing research for this briefing. I didn't know that this was an effect. Cardiovascular training actually impacts your mitochondrial density. So mitochondria, it's something of a meme to say that mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell. In each cell in our body, you think of your cell as roughly spherical. Not all of them are spherical, most of them aren't, but if you think of it as being roughly spherical, you've got a number of little goodies inside the cell. You probably remember this from primary school biology. Those little goodies inside the cell are called organelles, and they all perform a different function. The nucleus is very important. That's where your DNA is stored. But arguably, the most important secondary organelle is the mitochondria. Mitochondria is the digestive system, as it were, of the cell. It's where chemical fuel comes in, it is processed into what it needs to be, and then is able to feed energy to the rest of the cell. So mitochondria are the microscopic power plants inside your cells where aerobic energy is actually produced. Regular cardio forces the body to build more of these power plants using a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. So what happens is when your body is in a state of physical stress while you're doing cardiovascular training, it sets off a bunch of chemical signals to the tissues throughout your body, but especially inside your muscles, indicating that, oh crap, we're running out of energy, right? The easily accessible energy systems that exist within mitochondria, ATP, are being depleted, and that means that we need to increase our capacity for generating and storing that energy. The mitochondria will then start to split inside your actual cells to create additional mitochondria. They will start self-replicating and building a little network inside each cell, inside each muscle fiber, to create and store extra energy. It's flippin' cool. I had no idea this was a thing. What that means then is that enhances your metabolic flexibility. So not only do you get more mitochondria, but they become larger and more efficient. So the mitochondria themselves get bigger and they split, there are more of them, and thus more efficient. They become incredibly adept at oxidizing, which is burning or consuming, both stored body fat and glycogen, for fuel. So glycogen is the sugar that you store in your cells, and then body fat is the other sort of long-term storage of energy in your tissue. And this means that you can sustain higher outputs of physical effort for much longer duration before your chemical energy reserves are depleted. So your mitochondrial system not only allows you to process more energy, but it gets better at processing the energy that it has. It's able to sustain prolonged effort. So you're getting fitter not only at a muscular level, but at a microscopic level inside each and every one of your cells. So cool. All right. Then we have operational range and crossover benefits. So what we mean here is by raising the threshold, right? You're improving the pump, the physical pump of the heart. You're improving the supply lines that feed into your muscles, and the cellular engines where that fuel is actually being processed. Cardio pushes back the threshold of your system failure, the point at which you gas out, you run out of energy, you hit a wall. It moves further and further away. So you're increasing your operational range. And that means that in your resistance training, so this is a whole separate set of training, you now have a highly developed aerobic system. And again, I'll explain what aerobic means a little later. That doesn't just help you to run further, right? It also helps you to lift heavier. That improved vascular network, all those extra vessels that you've now built inside your muscles, help to clear waste away and deliver oxygen so efficiently that your recovery time between heavy lifting sets drops dramatically. So that's not just the long-term recovery between different workouts, like the 2 or 3 days. We're talking about the 180 seconds between individual sets. That recovery time reduces because you're able to replenish your intramuscular fuel stores that much more efficiently. So your work capacity across all your physical domains increases. So those are, broadly speaking, how it impacts the physical stuff. Let's talk about the mental stuff, right? The second pillar. So here we're talking about how we engage mentally with the active cardio training. And this is broken down into 3 stages: before the training, during the training, and after the training, or effort. Let's call it effort, not training, because training is a long-term program, but let's talk about the individual effort. So before the effort, the thing we're doing there is strategic forecasting. And that when I say that this is a thing that we're doing, we're not just doing it once, we're not just doing it before, this is actually developing a skill that is transferable to other domains in life. So we're actually building cognitive muscles doing this as well. So the cognitive muscle that we're doing before the training relates to strategic forecasting. So we have to exercise executive function and planning. So unlike a gym workout where you go to the public gym and where the environment is static and controlled, outdoor cardio specifically requires environmental forecasting. You need to know what the environment is going to look like when you get there, or at least have a relatively solid idea. You need to know what the weather looks like. You need to know what the terrain looks like, what the hills look like, what the actual ground looks like. Is it paved, or is it like a dirt track or something like that? You need to know what the heat's going to look like, what the rain is going to look like, what the wind is going to look like. And you need to anticipate, you need to be preparing yourself not only cognitively to face those different challenges, but you need to be adjusting your route accordingly based on the criteria that you anticipate. You need to be selecting your gear appropriate to that environment. So there's a fair amount of stuff to think about before you've even done the effort. Then you need to think about your fueling logistics. So you're calculating your energy requirements in advance. And so you're deciding when you consume your pre-workout carbohydrates. We're going to get to nutrition in detail a little bit later, but we can talk about, for now, just remember that before you train, you need carbs. After you train, you need protein, like with resistance training. With carbs, as with cardio, you really only need the pre-workout carbs. The protein isn't that much of a big deal, but you need to plan in advance when you're going to have those pre-workout carbs. Are you having them the night before, the morning before, 5 minutes before, that kind of thing? You need to be planning all of that stuff based on the expected load that you're likely to encounter in your effort. You need to plan your fluid and electrolyte logistics for the route if necessary. Like if you're only running a 5K, you probably don't need to hydrate during the run, but you probably need to hydrate a little bit before the run, and definitely have a hydration plan for after the run, especially if it's been a hot day. You see how all these different factors connect in, and that kind of strategic thinking, that is a transferable skill that you can then use elsewhere in other aspects of your life. And then there's the mental framing. So preparing your mind for your known discomfort. So um, doing cardio workout is like any other workout. It's going to be uncomfortable. So you need to be preparing yourself for that discomfort. So you're preloading the decision to not quit before the fatigue actually sets in. It's easy to quit when you're feeling tired, but if you're deciding ahead of time that you don't get to quit for being tired, then that makes it that much easier. There's also things like cardio can take a lot of time and can be super boring. So maybe you need to anticipate what kind of stuff that you need to keep your mind occupied while you're doing it. Maybe it's you prefer to be a lot to get lost in your own thoughts and just thinking through stuff. Maybe you prefer to be thinking about the exercise that you're doing so that you can focus on every step, focus on every breath. Some people prefer that. Some people, like me, I prefer to be completely distracted. I like to have an audiobook or a podcast or something going on so that my mind is not what I'm doing at all. So my body is on autopilot and my mind is off somewhere else. Some people prefer something in between, maybe a little bit of music, especially if you want to pace your run to the beats per minute of a song, that kind of thing. Planning that kind of stuff ahead, having the right equipment, having the right preparation done, that all falls under the before the effort strategic forecasting side of this endeavor. And then once you get to the effort itself, when you actually arrive and you're ready to do the thing, this is now the execution and calibration phase. So one thing you need to be aware of or need to develop and take into account is your interoceptive awareness. Interoception is the sense of what's happening inside your own body, how your body is moving, where it is in space. Cardio demands constant internal monitoring. So you need to interpret your real-time physiological data, your heart rate, your breathing, your cadence, your mechanical form, your perceived exertion, so how hard you feel like you're actually working, and accurately adjust your output. Yeah, okay, I've got more to say about that, but let's go through the other points first. Next is pacing and resource management. So unlike a heavy lift that lasts 10 seconds, right? It's you do your 5-10 reps. An endurance session, so you're running for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it means, or whatever it might be, requires calculating fuel consumption over time. It trains your brain to strategically meter out your energy so that you don't burn out before reaching your objective. On a really long endurance run, you're probably having to carry some of your fuel with you, like carry it on your body. You're not just burning the stuff that you consumed beforehand. So you need to be monitoring your consumption of that fuel as you go. Then there's dynamic problem solving. So this is adapting the plan to real world friction in real time. So this is something like you hit an unexpected headwind. So it's windier than you thought it was going to be, and now you're running directly into the wind. It's going to work against you. Maybe you've got a blocked path. The path that you plan to run down is under construction, or there's a group of children in the way, or something like that. Your brain needs to learn to recalculate your pace and your effort instantly without breaking rhythm. You need to be able to adjust in the moment without it just collapsing your entire effort. And the thing I wanted to talk about with your interoceptive awareness, which relates to this dynamic problem solving point, is that a lot of the data that you are acquiring from your interoceptive senses, from your body's internal feedback system, is lies. Your body will lie to you. Why does it lie to you? Because it doesn't want you to be exerting energy unnecessarily. It wants you to be lying on the couch and relaxing, conserving your energy for when it needs it. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we can't afford to just relax when we're not in use, right? We need to be training so that we're ready. So we need to be fighting against that urge to just bum out on the couch. We need to be ignoring the data that is not useful, that's trying to get us to stop doing the things we need to be doing, and only paying attention to the data that is useful. So we need to be monitoring how our knee feels that we injured 6 months ago, and does it still feel okay? But we need to be ignoring that stitch that comes in as you're running up the hill. You need to be paying attention to your breathing rate and your running cadence, what your pace is, but ignoring the fact that it feels like you're running straight into a wall and you don't have any energy left, because you are not running into a wall and you do have energy left. This is just your body lying to you. So being able to distinguish between valid data and fake data and make on the fly adjustments, that's very much part of this cognitive exercise. And then the third component to the cognitive aspect is after the effort. So now this is once you've completed your exercise and now you are doing stuff after the fact, and that is data analysis and adaptation. So first thing you want to do is you want to review your telemetry. Telemetry is a fancy word. It sounds like you're sailing a submarine or something, but really what you're doing is the equipment that you carry with you is collecting data about the job that you're doing. If you are a serious or at least a semi-serious athlete, you are at least tracking some of your activity on your pad. If not on your pad, then you've got your per scan device, which is able to do provide you with even more data as you're training. And after your effort, that is a good time to review that data. A good set of equipment is something like a Samsung smartwatch or an Apple Watch or a Garmin watch or something like that, which has a heart rate monitor, GPS, cadence monitor, step counter, all that kind of thing, so that it can track your activity quite a lot of detail and give you a lot of meaningful feedback about the work that you've done. So not only your total time taken, but it can also measure your pace at different aspects during the activity. So say at this point you were running at a pace of 5:30, but then later you're running at a pace of 6:30, which isn't very good, and then you were walking and you dropped down to 8 and then back up to 5:30 again. And you can also compare your previous efforts. So if you've run that same route before, you can see how your effort today compared to that route before. And using apps like Strava or Samsung Health can give you a lot of very useful data about the activity that you're engaging in. So telemetry, very useful, worth it. Not all of those tools are free. Obviously, you have to purchase the hardware. But if it's a pad, you already have that hardware. The apps that you're connecting to, some of them come free with your device. So if you have an iPhone, then you get Apple Health for free. If you have a Samsung device, then Samsung Health comes with it for free. If you want a premium version of Strava, which is a more kind of universal platform, that's going to cost you a little bit. It's not too expensive, but it's not nothing. The more useful information you get, the more you're probably going to have to pay for it. But whatever information you have at hand is worth examining. Then once you've reviewed your telemetry, you want to calibrate your system. So correlating your pre-workout fueling and hydration, so the stuff that you planned ahead of time, and you want to measure that up against your actual performance and reassess, like, did I plan my fueling and my hydration properly, or did I miss a step? Did I underhydrate or overhydrate because I had to stop and pee? Or did I feel like I was running out of fuel? Maybe I should have loaded a bit more carbohydrates before I ran, that kind of thing. You can help recalibrate, which can help you plan for the next one. And then you want, which is exactly what you're doing there, is you're updating the model. So using your post-action analysis, once you've completed it, to refine your operational parameters for the next session. So you're closing the cognitive learning loop. Each run, each cycle, each swim is a learning opportunity that helps you to improve the next one. The third pillar is the spiritual or the emotional pillar. And here we're talking about command discipline and the crucible of the mind, which is a very cool term. So the first thing we need to bear in mind here, let me sip my beverage, is the anatomy of discomfort. So this is the grind versus the spike. Discomfort is something when you're doing physical training that you have to become very comfortable with. You have to become comfortable with discomfort. But also recognizing that different forms of discomfort mean different things, and you will encounter different forms of discomfort doing different kinds of exercise. The kinds of discomfort you get from doing resistance training feels very different to the discomfort you get from doing cardio training. So what that means is you've got the explosive versus the sustained discomfort. So resistance training requires momentary explosive courage, right? You're pushing that weight up and then you're letting it back down, and then you push it back up and you let it back down. So you psych yourself up emotionally, you move the heavy weight for a couple of seconds, and then you rack it, and then you can rest for a couple of minutes. Cardio is the exact opposite of that. It's a slow, monotonous, low-grade grind. So you're just doing the same thing on repeat for minutes or even hours, which means that you need to be comfortable with sitting in the friction. So there's no quick dopamine hit of heavy deadlift. So when you're doing resistance training, you can get some chemical rewards pretty quickly from making some quick achievements. You can spend an hour in the gym and you can get like 20, 30 dopamine hits because you hit that weight that you were really hoping for, or you managed to squeeze out 2 extra reps over what you did last week. Those quick wins give you some dopamine hits, which make you feel pretty good. But when you're doing cardio, it's very difficult to get that on the fly, right? You're maybe going to get one dopamine hit at the end. So you're sitting in that zone of discomfort for a prolonged period. And it requires you to adjust to that emotionally. You're basically sitting in a state of physical distress. So you've got heavy breathing, burning lungs, heavy legs for 20, 30, 40, 60 minutes straight. And it's an ultimate simulator for sustained friction. So this is where the command override comes in. So this is you're winning the internal negotiation with yourself. You've got the survival reflex. So this is when you run or row for a long time. The primitive part of your brain, so that's the amygdala, perceives the rapid depletion of your energy. So although you're not aware of your depletion of energy at a conscious level, the less sophisticated parts of your brain are able to monitor that in real time. It can actually sense how much fuel is in your system, how much you have available, and the rate at which you're burning through it. It's pretty cool that although you don't have a fuel gauge like you do in your car, you can't look up there and see what's happening. Your brain is aware of this stuff at a certain level. So when your amygdala perceives the rapid depletion of energy as and when it sees that, it considers that a threat to your survival, and that's when it starts to broadcast panic signals. And these are the false data that I was talking about earlier. Panic signals are things like, we're out of breath, we're expending too much energy, we need to stop doing this immediately, feel exhausted, feel out of breath, feel pain, feel a stitch. Those are panic signals that your brain is throwing up to try and get you to stop doing what it thinks is a threat. And this is where you need to engage your command override, your emotional or spiritual fortitude, by separating your discomfort from actual danger. Training cardio is the active practice of separating the sensation of discomfort from actually being in danger. Just because you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean you're in danger. Your executive function, so that's your prefrontal cortex, that's up here, needs to step in. Evaluate the telemetry, so that evaluate the actual data that's being fed in from the different systems in your body, and issue a command override saying, I acknowledge the alarm, but I'm going to disregard it. Thank you for the information. That's not useful right now. We're not dying, we're working, continue the mission. And then there you have a sequence of micro decisions. So in a 5K run, you don't just decide not to quit once, right? You have to keep making that decision over and over again. You have to decide not to quit 100 times. Every step is a negotiation with yourself. And every time you don't stop, you reinforce the chain of command between your mind and your body. And you're training yourself to listen to yourself. Then there's the attrition of boredom. I've spoken about this a little bit before, but let's go into more detail about it now. So the physical fatigue isn't the only enemy. Monotony is an equally destructive, I suppose you could call it. Staring at the back line in the bottom of a pool, so that's when you're swimming, so you've got that black line, and that's where how you're making sure that you're moving straight. Just staring at that line, or the tarmac in front of you if you're running on a road, or a static wall if you're on a stationary bike or something like that. It forces you to confront boredom. Now, there are tools that you can use to mitigate that boredom, as I've said, podcasts, music, whatever it might be. But really, there's an argument to be made that sitting with that mental solitude in a world that we live in, which is full of constant digital distraction, cardio offers you the opportunity to strip away all that noise. And it can force you, if you allow it, to be alone with your own thoughts, to learn to regulate your mind when it's understimulated and physically stressed, which can help to build an immense capacity for focus. So although, for example, I do prefer to exist in a state of absolute distraction while I'm training, um, that is not usually how I run, at least not when I'm running like park run or something like that. When I'm just doing a slow run or training or something like that, I might have music on. But when I'm doing park run, which is, it's not a competitive run, but it's where I test myself, where I test my fitness every week, I prefer to have only music. And the music exists as a tool to help me pace my steps. It's not even music that I enjoy aesthetically necessarily. It's just music that helps me to pace my run, so that I'm not being fully distracted. I'm forced to think about what's going on in my body, in the scenario, in what's happening here in the world, and that it enforces that mental solitude. And in fact, in most competitive running environments, if you're actually running a race, you're not even allowed that. You're not allowed to have music, because having stuff in your ears is a potential safety hazard. So really, if you want to prepare yourself to run competitively, then getting used to the solitude is going to be a necessary aspect of it. Of course, if you're swimming, it's going to be even more difficult because those waterproof earbuds are quite expensive and not all that reliable. So getting used to that mental solitude is a beneficial aspect of cardio training as well. And then there is operational carryover from all this emotional work that you're doing for the cardio. What that does is it helps you to inoculate yourself against stress. So the emotional resilience that you forge in the crucible of cardio training directly transfers to your real world capacity. When you're hit with a sudden crisis, a grueling long-term project, or an emotionally exhausting week, your baseline for panic is already drastically altered because you've built the cognitive muscles for addressing a panic signal and dismissing it and carrying on despite it. That is such a valuable skill. It's hard to overestimate. Another benefit is the proof of identity. Completing a brutal cardio session, one of those sessions where you're really, really pushing yourself, where it kind of feels like you're going to die, but you don't. It's an undeniable, objective, measurable proof of self-efficacy, that you've done something that you didn't think you could do, and now you have done it, right? You prove to yourself in real time that your will dictates your actions, not your feelings. You don't quit when things get hard because you have systematically trained yourself to endure. Being able to think that about yourself and knowing that it's true, that is gift from the gods. And it's difficult to find that kind of self-efficacy in any other form of training other than intense cardio. Another aspect here relates to something you've probably heard about, which is the psychological reward system, also known as the runner's high. So a lot of cardio athletes, especially runners, report that if they're on a long distance run, it's difficult at first, but eventually they kick into a different cognitive gear at some point during the run, and then they experience a form of euphoria that they refer to as the runner's high. And this has actually been studied, and it has some physiological basis. Excuse me. All right. So let's describe what we're talking about here. So if you can win that internal negotiation with yourself, so you've got systems in your brain telling you to stop, and you've got systems in your brain telling you to keep going. If the system's saying keep going, win. So in other words, you win the internal negotiation and you push past that initial wall of discomfort, the body eventually stops fighting you and it starts helping you. Your primitive systems start to realize like, oh, okay, we're actually doing this. Let's stop adding friction to this process and let's start kicking in systems that can make it work more smoothly. And this is what people experience as the runner's high. And this is it's a profound shift where the grind suddenly gives way to a state of flow. You've probably come across the notion of flow, which is a state of reduced anxiety, analgesia, so that's pain relief, so built-in pain relief, and even a mild euphoria. So how does this work? What is the mechanism by which this functions? So for decades, this was attributed to a thing called endorphins. While your body does release endorphins during cardio to blunt your physical pain in the muscles, they are large molecules that struggle to cross the blood-brain barrier. What are endorphins, right? Let's explain that. So endorphin is a portmanteau for endogenous morphines. So endorphins are peptides, which means that they are small proteins, so carbon-based molecules that make up short chains of amino acids. And these bond with target receptors called opioid receptors, which is the same receptors that are targeted by drugs like morphine, that are primarily located in the central nervous system and in the pituitary gland. So this is in your spinal cord, in the larger nerves coming out of the spinal cord, and in your pituitary gland, which is just underneath your brain, if I remember correctly. But notice this, not in your brain itself, only in the central nervous system. So these are the same receptors that morphine bonds to, because morphine is kind of an external synthetic or a plant-based analog to these naturally occurring chemicals that are part of your body, endorphins, and endogenous morphines. Their main function is to is basically analgesia, pain management. So these can intercept your pain signals that are traveling through your spinal cord, and they can prevent them from reaching the brain. So it's like a chemical blocker that sits in that pain channel, so that even though you are experiencing physical pain, that signal doesn't go all the way up to your brain, and then it doesn't distract you, which you can imagine might be useful in a lot of circumstances. The issue here, however, is a structure called the blood-brain barrier. So endorphins are relatively large, and they're water-soluble peptide molecules. And the ones that are produced in your bloodstream and muscles during exercise, they cannot easily cross the structure called the blood-brain barrier, which is sort of a structure that prevents too much sharing of material between the actual brain and the rest of your body. A lot of materials are too large to pass through that barrier. And endorphins are one of those structures that can't fit through there. They just don't fit through the gaps. It's like think of it as a mesh or a net, and it's too big to fit through that hole. So they effectively numb the body kind of below the brain, but they don't directly alter the state of the brain itself. But what we have learned more recently is that the real driver of the psychological aspect of the runner's high is the endocannabinoid system. So sustained cardio triggers the release of endocannabinoids, specifically the one called anandamide, which is often referred to as the bliss molecule. Because these are lipid soluble, so they don't dissolve in water, they dissolve in basically fat and lipid. They easily cross into the brain, so they can get through that system, and they can induce a natural state of calm and euphoria. So what are endocannabinoids, which is another portmanteau for endogenous cannabinoids. Endocannabinoids, like anandamide, are lipids. They are sort of a kind of fat molecule, which means that they are fat-based neurotransmitters. They're a molecule that's involved in signaling in neural pathways, and they are derived from let me get this pronunciation correct, arachidonic acid. I think that's right, arachidonic acid. Now these, like endorphins, these bond to specific target receptors in your system. And in this case, the receptors have a different shape, and these are specific cannabinoid receptors, specifically in this case, CB1 and CB2, which are distributed extensively throughout your brain and your nervous system and your immune system. So these will dock just about anywhere in your body. And the primary function of endocannabinoids is maintaining homeostasis, right? So they're there to manage, make sure that systems maintain status quo. Nothing is running off the rails. Nothing is running too high or running too low. They're there to kind of keep things within an acceptable range. But they do also assist in pain modulation. So they will assist your endorphins in analgesia. And they also heavily regulate things like mood, memory, stress response, and the reward centers of the brain. So because endocannabinoids are small and lipid soluble, so they're fat based, they can effortlessly slip through that blood-brain barrier. The cellular membranes that cross the blood-brain barrier, they're fine. And when they're produced during sustained cardiovascular output, they can travel directly from the bloodstream into the brain, binding to receptors that induce euphoric anti-anxiety state, a euphoric anti-anxiety state associated with the runner's high. So it does actually induce a sense of euphoria. You're not just imagining it, it really is doing that. It's built-in drug system. So endorphins are protein-based pain blockers that work on the body's opioid system but struggle to enter the brain. But endocannabinoids are fat-based homeostasis regulators that easily enter the brain to alter the mood and stress levels. Now, why does this happen? Why do we have this built-in drug system in our brain? So this is an evolutionary mechanism that is designed to encourage and reward sustained locomotion, which is historically necessary for tracking prey or migrating. So pre-history lesson here. Our ancestors who evolved mostly in the savannah in parts of Africa adapted to become endurance hunters. So when we think of animals that are adapted for running, we think of things like the cheetah. The cheetah, of course, is the fastest animal on land, and they are adapted for running at very high speeds for very short periods of time. So really, really fast sprint up to 110, 120 kilometers an hour for 20, 30 seconds, and then they are completely exhausted and they have to rest. Not all animals that are adapted for running are adapted for high-speed sprints. Many species are adapted for endurance running, so they can run much lower speeds, but for much longer periods of time. And the most extreme example of that, the species that is best adapted for endurance running, in other words, they can run for the longest period of time, longer than any other known species, is humans. We are that species. So we occupy the other end of that spectrum from cheetahs. And we'll go into the physiology in a minute of why that's so different. But that is our ecological niche. Because we've adapted, bipedalism is part of our adaptation for that, because we've adapted for that specific mode of locomotion, that gave us a tactical advantage when it came to hunting. So where something like a cheetah can sprint up behind an antelope, give it a swipe, knock it out, and then kill it quickly, our ancestors found that we did not have the necessary physical equipment to easily overpower our prey. We wanted to take down something like a kudu. We were not fast enough to catch up with it. And if we did, we were not strong enough to overpower it physically like a leopard or a lion might do. Even with tools, things like spears, hand axes, bows and arrows, which came along a little later, those did not give us sufficient example to be able to physically overpower our prey, unless we were able to mob it in very large numbers. And through most of history, humans were simply not living in large enough numbers to be able to deploy that kind of a force. So the hunting strategy that those Paleolithic humans developed and perfected was the endurance hunt. So they would sneak up relatively close to a prey animal, let's say a kudu, and then they would launch their weapons at range. So that's throwing spears, bows and arrows, just rocks, enough to injure the animal at a distance. So they didn't have to get into physical contact with the prey. They could do it at a range of 20, 30, 40 meters if they were very talented, or if they got the topology of the encounter right. Injure the animal, not enough to kill it, just enough to make it soar and make it run. That animal would then start running away, and the humans would follow along behind it. Animal would run and run and run until it was thoroughly exhausted. It's trying to catch its breath. It stops for a rest. It looks over its shoulder. There's the humans still there. So it runs again. And it keeps going until it can't anymore. Stops, catches its breath, looks over its shoulder. The humans are still there. It has to keep running. And this will keep happening again and again until the prey animal was completely exhausted and couldn't stay conscious anymore. It would eventually collapse. The humans who had been following it along all this time were right there ready to coup de grace and to butcher it up and carry it home. And at that point, that journey home was probably a pretty long one, and they needed to be able to carry that butchered carcass over a relatively long distance at relatively high speed to get it back for the family before it was starting to rot. That's a very specialized hunting strategy, and it's one that is not unique to humans, but we are the best at it. It's no coincidence, by the way, that we have bonded with two other species that also are adapted for endurance running in a similar way. Horses, obviously, they're not carnivores, so they don't hunt in the same way, but they are adapted for endurance running. And wolves, dogs, who are also do endurance hunting in a very similar way to early humans. So that is the evolutionary framework behind which humans do that. The problem, however, is that unlike cheetahs and a lot of other species that are adapted for particular forms of athleticism, we don't have that innately. We don't just sit on a couch and develop that musculature. We have to be practicing it every single day in order to build and maintain that level of fitness. And in a modern society, almost all of us simply don't. Even those of us who do decide to embark on a campaign of physical improvement to become athletically fit, most of the people in that category never even reach the necessary level of physical fitness to be able to sustain that level of hunting. So, our natural state, and even a hobbyist or even an almost extreme way of life now, most people never get to what used to be the natural state for our ancestors 100,000 years ago. So that's the historical context. In the context of the Dauntless, of mission readiness, this practice teaches us profound psychological lesson. If you have the discipline to command override your initial panic signals and to endure that early friction that starts out at the beginning of a cardio effort, or a run or a swim or whatever it might be, your body will eventually deploy its own neurochemical support fleet to help you to finish the mission. This reward is quite literally on the other side of the resistance. So in this case, resistance is far from futile. I don't know why I didn't think of that pun when I was talking about resistance training. Like, I spent 2 hours talking about it, and it never occurred to me to say resistance is futile, but I remembered it this time. Okay, here we go. All right. Let's talk about the why. Why would we want to do this to ourselves? Other than the fact that it's what we're naturally adapted for, what's the benefit? So let's talk about this in terms of the cost versus the return. So cardiovascular training is undeniably expensive, not in terms of money, although it can be in terms of money, expensive in terms of resources in general. It demands hours of your week, every week, forever. It requires you to tolerate high levels of friction and boredom, so it's cognitively and emotionally expensive. But from a mission readiness perspective, the physiological dividends that it pays out over a lifetime are staggering. They're as important as resistance training, if not more so. So the first thing you need to do is, or the first thing we need to talk about is your functional capacity and your stamina. So that's expanding your operational range. Firstly, let's think about the division of labor. So if resistance training is your maximal force production, so that's your ability to lift the heavy thing off the ground, cardiovascular training is your sustained work capacity, your ability to carry that heavy thing for 5 kilometers or whatever it might be. It also improves your margin of safety. So we spoke about this in the previous one when we talked about reserve capacity. So we train to expand our safe operating margin, which is a highly developed aerobic base, which means that the ordinary physical demands of life, climbing multiple flights of stairs, rushing through an airport, an unexpectedly long hike turns out to be 15 Ks instead of 5 Ks because the person who organized it didn't check the board or whatever it might be. If you have a sufficient safe operating margin, then those things don't register on your system. Right? It's just fine. It's just something that you tolerate. You aren't just surviving these tasks, you're performing them with massive reserve capacity left over. Now, the benefits of reserve capacity, think of this as kind of your emergency buffer. It represents the vital physiological gap between your maximum physical output and the actual demands placed upon you. So you want to be operating always at a level of, this is what I can do, this is what I need to do now. There needs to be a gap there so that you have margin for error. So if you're operating at this level and suddenly something surprising comes along and you need to push up your effort level, you push it up to there and you've still got plenty more to go. And let's say something else unexpected happens and it pushes that up to there, you're still good. You still have reserve capacity. That's the safety margin. That's where you want to be. It acts as an emergency buffer, and it ensures your system won't immediately exceed its limits during unexpected events requiring sustained intense effort. So let's say you're operating at this level, but this is your emergency level. Right, this is all you can do. Now an unexpected challenge comes along and now it goes to here. Now you're operating at maximum. Now you're in trouble. The second unexpected thing comes along and now you can't do it anymore. You're now exceeding your ability to function. But if your ceiling is up here, it doesn't matter. You can bring it on. You can bring on 2 or 3 more unexpected things and still keep handling it. Might be hard, but you can do it. So, for example, you need to sprint for a connecting flight. You're traveling internationally, you've got a connecting flight that goes from here to there. Your first flight was 10 minutes late, which means that you've got exactly 5 minutes to get from this gate on this side of the airport to this gate on this side of the airport and get onto that second flight. If you don't have that reserve capacity available, you're just not going to make it. You're not going to make that connecting flight. Or perhaps you need to engage in sudden manual labor. You're out with a family member and they slip and fall. Now you need to be able to lift them up. But if you can't physically lift that person's weight, then both you and that person are in trouble. The reserve handles spikes in demand without risking your system failure. What about your cognitive preservation under stress? So when your cardiovascular system maxes out and your oxygen debt climbs, right? So this is where you're pushing yourself to the limit. Your brain shifts away from your executive function into pure survival mode. So you get tunnel vision, you start to panic, you start to compromise your decision making. But having that physical reserve capacity means that your brain remains fully oxygenated and calm during high exertion. So even when you're facing a physically taxing situation, you can still remain calm and exercise your proper judgment without being compromised. You preserve your cognitive pillar when you need it most in an emergency. It's also good for maintenance and for injury preservation. So in your resistance training, or when we spoke about resistance training, we talked about the analogy of having the reserve strength to catch yourself when you're carrying groceries and now you trip and fall. Having that reserve strength to be able to stop yourself from falling means that both you and your carton of eggs are safe because you've got that reserve capacity. The cardio equivalent of that is you're maintaining your neuromuscular control. So fatigue destroys form. And when you're completely gassed out, when you're completely exhausted, your steps get heavy and your joints start to absorb bad impacts. Cardiovascular reserve keeps your movements sharp and coordinated so that you're less likely to make that trip in the first place, right? You're preventing that exhaustion-induced injury. So you're carrying those groceries and you're not even getting into that dodgy situation to begin with. You don't even have to catch yourself. But if you do, you've got the physiological reserves available to do so. You also unlock a thing called micro recovery. So when you have a high operational reserve, normal life stresses barely register as a challenge. So your heart rate spikes for a task, but then returns back to its resting baseline in seconds rather than minutes. So you don't have to sit there catching your breath while everybody else is waiting to carry on with your day. You can just lift the heavy thing, help the person up off the ground, recover from your trip and fall, and then you're just ready to keep going because you recover very quickly. You don't have to spend the rest of the afternoon feeling drained and exhausted from minor physical output. You keep fully energized for the remainder of the mission. You don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. Once again, I recall the anecdote of Commander Patterson falling down the stairs when she was fit. I mean, she was sore and shaken by it, but she was able to return to her training regimen the next morning as if nothing happened. So the adrenaline of the slip and fall compromised her ability to function for a couple of hours during that evening, but by the next day she was fine because that physiological toll wasn't there. The previous time that happened, not only was she battered and bruised, but her physiological reserves were completely drained. She was still exhausted by that experience the following morning. but her recovery time was massively concatenated as a result of being cardio fit. So your quicker recovery is enabled by having a more powerful aerobic engine that clears your systemic fatigue faster. You recover quicker between sets at the gym, but you also recover quicker from physically exhausting day of work. I mean, if you think about it, that's the thing that's going to happen, just sort of a day-to-day benefit without even running into emergency situations. Having that extra reserve means that if you have a 9-to-5 type job, you go to the office, and when you used to come home feeling exhausted, and now all you've got energy for is to have dinner and sit in front of the TV, you recover in 20 minutes. You're no longer exhausted once you've had that meal, and now you're ready to do stuff in the evening. It unlocks whole more hours in the day that you didn't have access to before. Yes, sure, you probably have to spend some of those hours training, but then you've still got more hours after that. You've got more time to do stuff. Just having that is going to massively improve your quality of life. There's also the efficiency dividend. Think of this as internal economics. Specifically as it relates to wear and tear. So by lowering your resting heart rate through your cardiovascular exercise, you're saving your heart millions of beats over the course of a year, and you were reducing the mechanical wear and tear on your central pump. Yes, sure, you're going through relatively short bursts of a higher intensity heart rate than you otherwise would, but if you stretch that out over minutes or hours or weeks or days, the average number of heartbeats over that time is massively reduced. So short bursts of high heart rate leads to long periods of reduced heart rate. You have a net saving of heartbeats over that time. You also have an improved fuel economy, think of it that way. Because your cellular engine, your mitochondria, is upgraded, it's more efficient, there's more of them, your body becomes incredibly efficient at utilizing your oxygen and partitioning your nutrients. So the chemical fuel that comes into your system, it knows exactly where it needs to go. You effectively get more operational mileage out of the fuel that you consume. This has impacts when you're managing your diet in terms of kilojoule consumption, because it's going to affect what you call your basal metabolic rate. So even though you are putting on muscle mass, which theoretically should be burning more fuel, because you are getting better at burning the fuel that you have, the impact of that is relatively small. So your basal metabolic rate, although it will shift over time as your body composition changes, that shift is going to be subtle. So you need to be compensating for that and really looking at the historical data, not just at doing the math of this much muscle mass equals that much consumption. Okay, sorry, I'm getting into the weeds there. The benefit also is in terms of your metabolic health, which is related to what I was just talking about. Firstly, you have a glucose sink. So sustained cardio is a massive consumer of energy, and your regular aerobic exercise acts as a highly effective sink for blood glucose, drastically improving your insulin sensitivity and helping to regulate blood sugar levels. If you are, like me, somebody who has a sweet tooth, the fact that, excuse me. The fact that I run an artisanal cheesecake bakery means that I'm constantly exposed to situations where I'm having to, for business purposes, consume more than my intended allocation of kilojoules and or sugar for the day. Doing cardio allows me to burn through that extra sugar more efficiently, because not only the act of doing the cardio, but also being more cardio fit, because my tissues are more insulin sensitive. I'm able to absorb and metabolize that sugar more efficiently. Yeah. All right, that's Harris, by the way. He's no longer sleeping nicely in that bed over there. He's now doing this. Okay, next thing it does is it helps to regulate your blood pressure. We've spoken extensively about this, but by making the blood vessels more elastic and more responsive to the adjustments in pressure, your consistent cardiovascular training is one of the most effective non-pharmacological interventions for lowering and managing your blood pressure. In terms of being a regular blood donor, this is very distracting, I know. In terms of being a regular blood donor, having blood pressure that is too low is going to actually disqualify you from being a regular blood donor. What you're really looking for is not low blood pressure. What you're looking for is consistent blood pressure. But if you are consistently high or you're consistently failing the screening test because your blood pressure is a little on the high side, then lowering it is what you want to do. You want to get it down into a safe range. The next band of benefits, sip this, is the longevity and health span benefits. So think of this as extending your mission. The ultimate metric in the realm of longevity science is one of the most powerful predictors of a long functional life, and that is your VO2 max, which short definition is the maximum rate at which your body can consume and utilize oxygen. But let's explain what all that means. So VO2 max stands for volume, that's the V, of O2, which is oxygen, VO2 maximum. And it's the absolute maximum rate at which your body can consume, transport, and utilize oxygen during intense maximal exertion. So if you think of your body as a vehicle, the VO2 max is the size of your aerobic engine. So that's the motor itself, how much you can possibly expend. It represents your absolute physiological ceiling for sustained cardiovascular effort. And biologically, it's dictated by two independent factors working in tandem, known as the Fick equation, F-I-C-K. First factor is delivery, so that's your cardiac output. How much oxygen-rich blood your heart can pump into the working muscles. And second one is extraction. So that's arteriovenous oxygen difference. That's how efficiently your muscles, specifically the mitochondria in your muscles, can pull that oxygen out of the bloodstream and use it to burn fuel, glucose, fat for energy. I'm not sure if I spoke about this before, but you need two things. Think of consuming energy like a fire, right? If you're trying to build a campfire, you need two things. You need fuel, wood, and you need oxygen. Oxygen is a necessary catalyst that facilitates the chemical reaction of fire. It's also the catalyst that facilitates the chemical reaction of physical movement. It's the exact same thing. So you need fuel, so that's either fat or sugar, glucose, and then you need oxygen to facilitate that chemical reaction, which is how you get that movement, which is why both of those things are essential. So the metric is universally expressed as a relative rate, and the unit there is milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, which is ml/kg/min. And this allows for fair comparisons between individuals of different sizes. So it allows you to, your sizes are relevant. You're compensating for that in the equation, what your actual body size is. So how do we measure VO2 max? There's a variety of different ways that we can measure it, but more often than not, we're actually just calculating it based off proxy measurements. So in precise laboratory environments, we can measure it directly using a system called spirometry, which is it's the clinical gold standard, direct spirometry. It's actually the only way to measure it definitively. And it takes place in a sports science lab or a clinical setting. It's using equipment your GP probably doesn't have, but if you go to a sports science specialist, they probably have the necessary equipment. Protocol is that you are placed on a treadmill or a stationary bike, and you wear a specialized airtight mask that's connected to a metabolic cart, a piece of equipment, like a tray of equipment. Where it works is the test starts at an easy pace, so you start running or you start cycling, and the resistance or incline is steadily increased every minute. So it goes up, goes up, goes up, which is called a graded exercise test. You are then pushed until absolute physical failure, until you absolutely cannot go any further, and the point at which you literally can't take another step or make another pedal stroke because you completely hit the wall. What they're doing during that is they are testing, so using the metabolic cart, which is that suite of equipment, that pallet of equipment, they're continuously analyzing the exact volume of oxygen that you inhale versus the carbon dioxide that you exhale. So remember, you've got an airtight mask over your mouth and nose, so they can track every gram or milliliter of air that you're breathing in or out. And when your oxygen consumption plateaus, when it no longer increases, despite the workload continuing to increase, you've hit your true VO2 max. So they can measure how much of that oxygen that you're actually consuming. but that is not usually how we measure it, right? Most of the time you're calculating, you're trying to work out what your VO2 max is based on proxy measurements that kind of sort of get you to within the right area. So algorithmic estimation, or is what it's called. So that's when you're using your per scan device, that's how you're doing it. Most modern wearables provide a VO2 max score. And they do this without the benefit of one of those metabolic carts. And the way this works is they estimate your aerobic capacity by analyzing the relationship between your heart rate and your physical output. So your running pace as measured by GPS and your cycling wattage. So it's able to measure your heart rate. Most new per scan devices are able to measure your heart rate relatively accurately, and they can, using their built-in GPS, see how fast you are moving. So if you have an established baseline and you're running on flat terrain with a highly accurate heart rate monitor, which they are pretty good, they're quite accurate, then those algorithms are generally within a 5% margin of error from a lab test, but they can easily be skewed by things like heat, wind, elevation, so hills, or if you're wearing your watch wrong so that your heart rate is not measuring correctly, that kind of thing. So it's not completely reliable. It's a best guess. If you need to know your VO2 max, you need to go to a sports scientist and have it properly tested. But if you're a casual or amateur athlete, your per scan device is probably fine. It's giving you relatively reliable data to within an acceptable margin of error. If you don't have a per scan that has those kinds of sensors in them, you can use the old-fashioned way that it used to be tested, called the Cooper test. Excuse me. So they would use it's a field test basically, and those were the standard for estimating aerobic capacity without lab equipment, even portable lab equipment. And the protocol here was the 12 minutes, what they call the 12-minute Cooper run. So you warm up, get your body warm, and then you run as far as you can and as fast as you possibly can for exactly 12 minutes. So you just go flat out and get as far as you can go in 12 minutes. The total distance covered is plugged into a standardized formula, and it yields a relatively reliable estimate of your VO2 max. So it's calculated based on a proxy measurement. Arguably, a per scan device is more accurate, but to within an acceptable margin of error, that's going to give you what you need to know. So your VO2 max, the higher that score, the more it's going to tell you not only your longevity, how long you're likely to live, but it's also going to tell you your health span, how healthy you're likely to be later in life. The better your VO2 max, the better both of those anticipated outcomes. And this is because it strongly correlates with a metric called all-cause mortality. So this is the global measurement for the reasons why people die, the things that people die from. So it includes things like accidents, violent deaths, suicide, that kind of thing. It includes those in the metric, but those are a relatively small portion of the overall metric. Most people die from natural causes, disease, metabolic failure, that kind of thing. When you plug all of those different causes of death into this thing called the all-cause mortality, that VO2 max correlates most strongly with people who live the longest. So you're moving from the lowest bracket. When you move from the lowest bracket of cardiovascular fitness, so people who are just couch potatoes, to just the average bracket, so from the lowest to the average, drastically reduces your risk of all-cause mortality. So statistically speaking, it's just reducing your chances of dying significantly, drastically. Pushing it into the upper brackets, so going above average, provides an almost unmatched reduction in your risk of chronic disease. So when it comes to lifespan versus health span, cardio doesn't just add years to your life, it adds life to your years, right? So you're not just spending your last 15, 20 years confined to a chair with nothing that you you're able to do because you can't see, you can't work your hands, you can't think properly anymore. in those last 10, 15 years of life, you're able to live a relatively full life. You could be up, you can be mobile, you can be doing things, engaging with your family, participating in your hobbies, reading books, watching movies, working a job, whatever it is that you want to do. So not only is your lifespan extended, but your health span is expanded as well. And so it ensures that you remain a capable and effective Starfleet officer long into your career. Okay, that's the why. Those are all the reasons why we want to do this. Now let's talk about the how. So how are we getting all of these benefits? So first thing is we need to think about energy systems and how the body generates power. The body doesn't just have one engine, right? It's got different energy production systems that work in parallel with each other, kind of like a starship, right? So let's use that as our metaphor. Starship actually has at least 3 different propulsion systems, but we're only going to talk about 2. That's impulse and warp. And so we're going to broadly categorize these different power systems into impulse versus warp. So first one is the anaerobic system. So this is the energy production system that does not rely on oxygen to function. So this is not a chemical reaction that uses oxygen, the anaerobic system. Aerobic means with oxygen, an means without oxygen, and is the negative. Anaerobic system without oxygen. And this is like the impulse engines of your body. So it's the system that you would use for short, intense, and explosive effort. It doesn't use oxygen. Instead, it relies on readily available ATP, which is cellular energy, and glycogen, which is stored directly in your muscles. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and it's the primary energy currency of your cell, right? So this is the energy molecule that your cell is using. And functionally, it acts like a kind of microscopic rechargeable battery. Excuse me. It functions like a tiny microscopic rechargeable battery. So it captures chemical energy that is obtained from the breakdown of food molecules like glucose and fat, and it stores it in little molecular bottles. And when your body needs to perform work, whether that's muscle contraction during a heavy lift, or repairing tissue during recovery, or just keeping your heart beating, ATP breaks, that little bottle opens, and it releases that stored chemical energy, and it powers the required cellular processes. It feeds it into the mitochondria. The catch here, however, is that because it operates without oxygen, it's a highly inefficient system, and it produces metabolic byproducts like hydrogen ions. And this is the burn that you feel during a heavy set of squats or like a 100-meter sprint. So when you are employing explosive physical effort, so pushing really hard or running really fast, your muscles feel like they're on fire. It's the metabolic byproducts produced by the ATP system, your impulse engines. It also means that it has a limited duration, so it provides massive power, but it burns out very rapidly. So usually within, it's a long range, but 10 seconds for an extremely high pressure sprint, or 2 minutes for a slower but still very fast run. This is the primary system that you're taxing during resistance training. So when you're pushing, you're taxing your ATP, which is why you have to take long breaks between your sets, because you need to give your muscles a chance to replenish those fuel systems, and then you push again. This, by the way, talking about cheetahs, this is the principal energy system that cheetahs use when they're running. They have massive ATP stores, which is how they're able to get up to extremely high speeds, again, 110, 120 kilometers an hour for a relatively long time, 20, 30 seconds. That's much more efficiently than we can do it. The top human sprinter can only sprint for about 15, 16 seconds before hitting that wall. So yeah, ATP, that is our anaerobic system. Fortunately, we have a second system, the warp drive, the aerobic system. So this is your system for sustained effort. It uses oxygen to break down both your carbohydrates and stored body fats to produce massive amounts of energy. So those are your chemical storage systems that store a lot of energy. And the benefit here is that it's incredibly efficient, and it produces virtually no fatiguing byproducts. So there's no burn from sustained energy. You'll experience burn from those little explosive bursts, but not from long periods of time. If you're doing an ultra marathon for 46 kilometers or whatever it might be, you're not going to be feeling burned past the first couple of minutes because you'll be relying on ATP to get you warmed up, and then after that you're running on warp drive, so you're not going to feel that. It's going to feel different, still uncomfortable, but in a different way. And so this system can then run for hours or even for days. And when I say days, I'm not kidding. I mean, there are extreme athletes, people who run events called ultras, where they're literally running for between 24 and 36 hours nonstop. Your body is capable of doing that. You need to be an extreme athlete. You need to be conditioned for that exact kind of activity, and it's going to wreck you every time. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a thing that system can do. The goal of cardiovascular exercise is to make the aerobic system so large and so efficient that you could perform increasingly difficult tasks without having to switch over to the rapidly depleting anaerobic system, so that you're operating at an aerobic level more of the time without having to switch over and use the anaerobic system. Anaerobic system is always there, and you're always going to be using it for certain types of activities. But if you can run activities on aerobic where you used to run it on anaerobic, you're making the whole system that much more efficient and making your own life easier. Excuse me, sir. Okay. And this is where we get to a thing called zone training. We don't build these systems, aerobic and anaerobic, just by going out and running randomly, right? That's not really going to get you very far. We have to build them systematically in the same way that we would build our skeletal muscle mass systematically using particular modalities in resistance training. And the modality here is called heart rate zones. Now, you might find some controversy about heart rate zones on the internet. Not everybody agrees that this is the optimal way of training, and maybe they're right. But at least most people that I've spoken to and read and listened to seem to think that this, or a version of this, is probably the right way to go about it. So your levels of operating is broken down into 5 zones. With your heart rate max, so this is the absolute fastest your heart can beat, is the ceiling. That's as high as it goes. And then the lowest is sleeping, right? And then we break that scale down into 5 zones. Most people train completely wrong. They go too hard on their easy days and they go too easy on their hard days. And I recommend a polarized training model, focusing the vast majority of your time on zone 2, and I'll explain why in a moment. And then a small friction in zone 5, and then we kind of ignore the other zones. So let's explain what the zones are. Zone 1 is what we call active recovery. So this is roughly 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. So if your maximum heart rate is 200 beats per minute, which is probably more or less what it is for most people, then 50 to 60% of your max heart rate is like 100 beats per minute, which is not nothing, right? You're not sitting on the couch getting 100 beats per minute. You actually have to be doing something. But this is an exceptionally light effort. It looks like a casual walk or slow, relaxed bike ride or dynamic stretching. So maybe not all out yoga, but sort of a relatively vigorous stretching session. Your breathing would be virtually unchanged from your resting state, and you could hold a conversation indefinitely without taking a single deep breath. So, excuse me, sir. If you're just walking along with a friend, maybe you're walking through the mall or you're walking down the road and enjoying the sights, you're petting all the animals along the street or whatever, you're probably sitting in zone 1. So zone 1 does not provide enough stress to trigger meaningful cardiovascular adaptations. It's not going to force your body to build new capabilities or to expand your mitochondrial network or anything like that. Instead, its primary physiological function is circulation. You're just getting the blood pumping. You're moving stuff through. It gently elevates the heart rate just enough to pump fresh, oxygen-rich blood into the muscle tissues while flushing out the metabolic waste products. So this is the waste products that you built up perhaps during your last anaerobic session, like cellular debris, remaining hydrogen ions, that kind of thing. that you accumulated during your heavy resistance training or zone 5 intervals. We'll get to zone 5 in a minute. Excuse me, sir. So the application, why would you use this? So this is not a zone 1 is not a zone you use to build fitness. This is the zone you use to facilitate repair. We use zone 1 for warm-ups, for cool downs, and for dedicated active recovery days. And this is the bridge between complete physical rest, sitting on the couch, and actual training. So it allows you to speed up your recovery without adding any new fatigue to your central nervous system or to your joints. Zone 1 is not contributing fatigue. So, for example, if you are at the gym and you're doing heavy reps, you want to keep your heart rate slightly elevated. You don't want things to cool down too much, but you also don't want to be tiring yourself out. You can be walking at zone 1. I do this almost as a habit. I didn't even realize that I was doing it until someone pointed it out to me at the gym a few months ago. In between sets, I'm pacing up and down next to the machine, constantly walking. Or if it's the day after you've done a heavy session at the gym or a heavy zone 5 cardio day, going out for a walk, but keeping it at a relatively manageable pace is perfect. If you want to get your heart rate up a little bit before a resistance workout, a zone 1 walk on the treadmill is a perfect way of doing that. So you're warming up your muscles a little bit, you're getting your heart rate elevated slightly, but you're not fatiguing yourself. So that you don't start out your workout tired. That's what zone 1 is for. At parkrun, you'll see a lot of people who are there just for a zone 1 experience. And you can see them because they're the ones who arrive at the end after a full 5K with not a drop of sweat on their brow, grins on their faces, but they don't give the appearance of having made any kind of meaningful exertion. They're typically finishing anywhere from 50 minutes plus. Not to throw shade on anybody like that, but if they thought that they were going to parkrun for a workout and they stayed in zone 1 the entire time, they are kidding themselves. So no shame on, there's nothing wrong with doing zone 1 for a parkrun. I've done that a few times myself if I needed to recover from something the previous day. But if you think you're doing a workout in zone 1, you're not. You're not providing sufficient stress to your system to trigger any kind of meaningful adaptation. Now in zone 2, now we're starting to get some work done. So now we're talking 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So if your maximum HR is 200 beats per minute, we're talking 120 to 140 beats per minute. This is still a conversational pace. So you should be able to breathe through your nose and you can still speak in full sentences. And for most people, this feels frustratingly slow. It feels like you aren't working hard enough. It can be quite difficult to maintain a zone 2 pace if you're not used to it. I'm still not used to it. I hate zone 2 for this exact reason, because it feels like I should be going faster. It feels like I should be doing more. But this is the most important zone for structural adaptation. So spending hours, literally hours in zone 2 is the specific trigger for mitochondrial biogenesis. That's building those new mitochondria in your muscle fibers. And for capillarization, so for building new blood vessels inside your muscle fibers. This is where that trigger exists, is in zone 2. Also good for fat oxidation. So zone 2 is the exact intensity where the body maximizes its use of stored body fat for fuel. So this is where you're burning fat for fuel, rather than burning the glycogen in the anaerobic space. Some people will call zone 2 the weight loss zone or the fat burning zone, something like that. They are overstating it a little bit. It's a bit of an exaggeration to say that this is the only space where you're burning fat, but it is a good space to spend a lot of your cardio time, your training time during the week is in zone 2, because you are in fact burning more fat in this zone than in any other zone. The rule here is that to get fast, you first have to go slow. You can't build a massive aerobic base if you aren't constantly, try that again. You can't build a massive aerobic base if you are constantly pushing your heart rate too high. 80% of all your cardiovascular training should live strictly in zone 2. You don't want to be pushing it too hard. Most of the time you want to be living in zone 2. In zones 3 and 4, they call this the gray zone or the threshold. So this is 70 to 90% of your maximum heart rate. So again, if your max is 200, we're talking 140 to 180 beats per minute. What this feels like is you're breathing hard. You can only speak in short phrases. The trap is that this is where untrained individuals, so people who are new to training, naturally default when they go for a run, right? And it's called the gray zone. And it's because it's too hard to be an easy recovery day, and it's too easy to trigger maximum cardiovascular adaptation. So it's not good for fat burning or for triggering your mitochondrial adaptation, but it's also not pushing your heart rate up to where it needs to be. So it's easy to fall into the trap of the gray zone. Training here generates a massive amount of systemic fatigue because you're pushing hard, you feel tired. But it does not build the mitochondrial base that you would get in zone 2, nor does it push the absolute ceiling of your zone 5. So you're not actually expanding your cardiovascular capabilities either, unless you're training for a specific race pace. So like you're pushing to try and get yourself in shape for a 10K or something like that. Your time spent in zones 3 and 4, the gray zone, should be minimized. You don't want to be spending most of your workout in the gray zone. And like I said, it's a trap, right? Because it feels like you're working hard, but you're not quite working hard enough. And you're also working too hard for the benefits of zone 2. So gray zone is a trap. You want to minimize your time there. And yes, you're working for a specific purpose, like trying to optimize a pace for a 10K or something like that. Which brings us to zone 5. This is where you want to be, right? Some of the time. This is the ceiling. This is your VO2 max. So this is 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate. If your maximum is 200, then we're talking 180 to 200. So this is your maximum brutal effort. You can't speak. You're gasping for air the whole time. You want to be doing this in short intervals. So like 4 minutes of all-out effort, followed by 4 minutes of recovery. So that's back to zone 2 or even walking, and then back to 4 minutes again of all-out effort. You want to be jumping back in and out of zone 5. You don't want to be living in zone 5. In fact, you can't live in zone 5. It's just too physiologically taxing. If zone 2 builds the plumbing and the power plants, then zone 5 strengthens the pump. This is where you're getting your maximum heart benefit here. The extreme demand forces the heart to increase its stroke volume and pumping more blood per beat, and this forces the muscles to extract oxygen at their absolute physical limit. The rule here is because of the immense physical and central nervous system fatigue it generates, zone 5 should make up no more than 15 to 20% of your total cardio volume. So you're only living in the zone 5 space for up to a fifth of your total training time. Most of your time should be spent in zone 2. It's the tactical strike of cardiovascular training. So you use it sparingly as needed, but with maximum violence of action. So when you need it, you give it everything you've got so you don't get stuck in the gray zone trap, but then pull back to zone 2, let yourself recover, and then push back into zone 5 again. Okay, that's how it works, right? The zone training system is widely regarded as being the default system for how we do this. And there are lots of different approaches for how you optimize your zone placement, how you get from zone 2 to 5 and back down again. Interval training is a popular one, and there are different methodologies for interval training, that kind of thing. I would advise having a chat with your, if not a human trainer, then with your digital trainer. Again, most AIs are very good and very knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. They can help you find a training regime and system that works best for your time, for your capacity, for where you are in your fitness journey, so that you can optimize the usage of your time while you're training, and make sure that you get optimal results. As important as the actual training, as with resistance training, is the nutrition and recovery. Now, we spoke extensively about nutrition and recovery under the resistance training briefing, and I recommend everybody go take a look at that. And most of the same rules apply here, but there are some differences. And we're going to go through what those differences are. So the focus here is nutritionally speaking, for cardio, you want to be thinking less in terms of building blocks as the stuff to rebuild your muscles, and thinking more in terms of rocket fuel. So where resistance training is a structural stress that requires structural materials, in other words, protein, to rebuild the damage that you've done, cardio training is an energetic stress, and it requires chemical fuel, like carbohydrates, to sustain it. So in resistance training, running out of fuel means you fail a rep, right? You can't get to your full 12 reps, you stop at 11. Not a big deal. In cardio, so in running, for example, running out of fuel means that you fail the mission, right? You can't complete your 5K, or you can't complete your swim. Now you're stuck in the middle of the leg. Your body stores carbohydrates in the muscles and liver as glycogen. And for cardiovascular efforts, glycogen depletion is an absolute limiting factor. Once you're out of glycogen, you are out, and then you're stuffed, then you're in trouble. So you really need to think about your nutrition very carefully. You need to understand how your body burns through fuel. You need to be paying attention to your interoception so that you know how that fuel is being burned. And you need to be refining your approach as you go. You don't want to be stuck in an endurance athletic situation without fuel, because then you're going to be in trouble. All right, so let's think about the timeline. So how do we do this? Before your workout, before your cardio training session, you need to preload the system. So if you're attempting a long run on an empty tank, it's going to force the body to break down your muscle tissue for energy, and that is not what you want. You don't want to be losing muscle. That is a mistake. That's called a gluconeogenesis. So when you're moving too fast, or when you're moving too slowly for ATP to be the available fuel store, and you've burned through your glycogen, fat is not available, carbohydrates are not available, it's going to turn to your body's only going to turn to the other available fuel source, which is muscle fiber. So muscle fiber is very energy dense, and by digesting itself, that's how you're going to get through that thing. And you don't want that. You don't want to be losing muscle mass as a result. This is incidentally why a lot of elite athletes who do very well in cardio related sporting activities, endurance athletes, marathon runners, those kinds of people, they tend to look very skinny, because this is as a result, well, it's two things. One, because they don't want to put on excess mass, so they will avoid building too much muscle because they have to carry it around. And two, because they will have made multiple miscalculations in this exact area over the years, which will have resulted on them reabsorbing significant portions of their own muscle tissue. So they end up being very skinny. But we don't want that. We want muscle mass. Muscle mass is very important. So make sure that you're preloading your system with carbohydrates before you train so that you don't run out. You're actively sabotaging your resistance gains if you are falling back on gluconeogenesis. Intra-workout. So now while you're actually training, for efforts that are lasting longer than 60 to 90 minutes, you need to be able to refuel on the go, right? If you're just doing a 5K or even a 10K and you're going to be taking less than an hour, you're probably okay to rely on preloading. But if it's longer than that, if you're doing a long run or a cycle, or you're canoeing or something like that for very long distances, you need to have fuel with you so that you can top up as you go. So you need exogenous carbohydrates. So this is food that you're storing outside of your body. Lots of options available, things like gels. Those are relatively popular. It's debatable how good they are, but they're available. You can pick them up in most sporting stores. Electrolyte drinks, those are pretty good. Things like Powerade, Energade. They're relatively rich in both glucose and in electrolytes, and also help you to replenish your hydration at the same time. So that's a pretty good option. Things like that are useful to maintain your blood glucose levels, keep them stable, and to spare your internal glycogen reserves. I've heard people saying that eating a slice of tiramisu while you're running can be pretty good at maintaining your glucose levels. I haven't tried that myself. It seems difficult because you got the plate and you got a fork. I don't know, but I hear it's good. Once you're done with your workout, after you finished running or rowing or cycling, whatever it might be, if you've been in resistance training, your first thing you go to after your workout is a protein shake. You need to replenish your protein straight away. But after a massive carbohydrate burning activity like cardio, you want to be replenishing your carbohydrates straight away, right? So you finished your run, you want to be downing some more carbs to replenish your glycogen stores so that you don't accidentally start eating into your muscle reserves. So this is going to refill your depleted tanks and be ready for the next mission, even if the next mission is just walking to the car. Hydration is also relevant here, slightly different in why it's relevant. So resistance training requires hydration for joint lubrication and for blood volume. So you want to make sure that you're not passing out halfway through your exercise, but cardio needs hydration for thermoregulation. So this is maintaining your heat, mainly through sweating. Sweating is the way that humans thermoregulate for the most part, and for electrical conductivity. So this is for your nerve signals. So your sweat strips the body of body fluid because you're shedding excess water to manage your temperature, and sodium. So your sodium is included in that sweat and it's moving out to your skin. If you only replace the water, so if you're only drinking water, you're going to dilute your body's electrical grid. Pure water is not a very good conductor of electricity. You need to have stuff dissolved in the water called electrolytes, which help you to conduct that electricity, which then makes it efficient as an electrical power system, communication system, not power, communication. So electrolytes, specifically sodium, potassium, magnesium, are very important, mandatory to maintain your cellular fluid balance and prevent neuromuscular cramping. And that's why those sports drinks, things like Energade and Powerade, contain not only glucose but also electrolytes. It's to help you rebalance your electrolytes as you go. So you're replenishing your water, but also all that sodium that you're losing as you go. If you're paying attention next time you're drinking one of those drinks, Energade or Powerade, you'll notice that not only are they sweet, but they're also a little bit salty. I didn't notice that until recently, but if you pay attention while you're drinking them, you'll see. And it's that extra sodium, those electrolytes that are in there. Okay, recovery is also different between resistance and cardio. The timeline and the mechanics for recovering from cardio are fundamentally different, in fact, from lifting heavy weights. Heavy weights. So resistance training intentionally tears specific localized muscle fibers, right? Remember how all that works? That's your hypertrophy stimulus. And that physical damage requires 48 hours plus of local repair before you can train that muscle group again. Some muscles a little bit less than that, but generally on average it's about 48 hours or more. The aerobic system, on the other hand, relies on systemic metabolic pathways. And if you keep the intensity low, so at zone 2, then the CNS, the central nervous system, and the metabolic pathways recover very quickly, often within 24 hours. So if you give yourself a good run, if you spend most of your time at zone 2, you're fine again the next day. You're probably not going to experience systemic fatigue for very long. There is, however, an impact factor. So while your heart and lungs recover quickly from something like a run, your joints might not, especially if you're untrained. So your joints will get stronger as you train, but if you're relatively new to the activity, your joints are going to suffer from the impact. So running in particular is what they call a highly plyometric activity, which means you're bouncing up and down, essentially. Every step sends shockwaves of impact up and down through the skeletal chain. You need to program your structural recovery for running just as you would for heavy squats. If joint recovery is the bottleneck, so if you find that your muscles are feeling fine the next day, but your knees are in bad shape, you're really sore for a couple of days after every cardio workout, you might want to try switching out some of your cardio training time with low impact modalities like cycling, rowing, or swimming that allow you to continue building that aerobic engine, but without grinding down the chassis of your body. Like I said, training running will improve the strength of your joints. There will be response and stimulus to that as well. So it will get better over time. If your knees are struggling at first, mine did when I started running as well, you might want to reduce the intensity of your running, switch out some of your cardio time to a different activities. I used cycling, that was my preference. till you have an opportunity to build up that joint strength in your knees. It's not only the bone, it's also the muscles surrounding the bone. And then you can start easing back up that running, and eventually it'll be fine, probably. If it's not, consult your physician. But yeah, running is a relatively high impact activity, so you need to be mindful of the effects of that, especially if you are a heavier runner. So a lot of the activities, it's a lot of the advice that you'll find online relating to running is talking to people who are relatively light. So we're talking women under 60 kilos, men under 80 kilos. But if you are above that, then a different set of advice might be relevant to you. So make sure that if you fit into that category, you are looking for advice from and for people who are above that weight bracket. But okay, so all of that is great. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that a well-rounded individual, somebody who is developing health in multiple different ways, health and strength, need to be doing a combination of both cardio and resistance training. We need to be accommodating both, and we need to be planning for both. That includes recovery and nutrition. Called concurrent training. There's a buzzword called hybrid athlete. Some people are dismissive of that term. I think it's pretty cool. But essentially, you want to be managing both of those systems. So a fully optimized Starfleet officer requires both the structural strength of resistance training and the stamina of cardiovascular training. And managing both simultaneously without one sabotaging the other is an operational challenge known as mitigating the interference effect. So here is the strategic protocol for a hybrid athlete or a dual threat officer. Sequencing is worth paying attention to. This stuff is a little controversial. Not everybody agrees with what I'm about to say, but it has been the sort of accepted view for some time, so there's probably something to it. So look wider for more advice if you feel like this isn't working for you, but it's probably a worthwhile place to start. So sequencing: lift first, run second. If you need to perform both modalities in the same day, resistance training should ideally come first. And that's because lifting needs you to be fresh, especially your central nervous system. You need to be rested and not fatigued, and fully topped off on your glycogen stores, so that you're ready to move those heavy loads safely. If you do cardio first, and I mean cardio, I mean like zone 2 or above. If you do cardio first, you're going to enter the weight room already fatigued. You'll have already tapped some of your energy reserves. Your ATP is not going to be fully restored. Your glycogen reserves are going to be partially depleted. And it's going to compromise your form and your strength output. You can successfully run on tired legs, but you can't safely deadlift with a tired nervous system. Now, when I say this, I don't mean you shouldn't do a quick warm-up run, more like a warm-up walk, zone 1 cardio, 20 minutes on the treadmill at zone 1, perfectly fine, just to get the heart running. You're not going to be experiencing significant fatigue from that, but zone 2 or above before you start lifting weights is probably a tactical error. What you can do instead is you can space your activities using what they call the 6-hour rule. Take a sip. Ideally, you want to separate your two modalities, and so if you're doing them both on the same day, space them out by doing, first, ideally you want to do your weights first and then your cardio after, and then you can do those in one session, by the way. But if you can, you want to space them out, and then it matters less which order you do them in. So if you're splitting them out by 6 hours or more, you can comfortably do your cardio first. So for example, you can do your cardio first thing in the morning, do a 5K run at zone 2 with interval training up to zone 5, and then you wait 6, 7, 8 hours and then do your weight training in the evening. By then you've had more than enough time to replenish your glycogen reserves and that kind of thing. Although you're not fully recovered from that cardio session, you are sufficiently, or should be sufficiently recovered to be able to do your resistance session that evening without experiencing too many negative effects. Apologies, my computer has just locked itself again. I cannot see my notes. Okay, there we go. All right, so that's the spacing methodology. Another one is another consideration is nutritional alignment, and this is the caloric trap. The most common reason that cardio kills your gains, is isn't the physiological interference. So it's not about your training modalities competing with one another. It's about your caloric deficit. So sustained cardio burns an immense amount of energy, especially if you're doing it right. And if you're trying to build or maintain muscle mass through resistance training, you need to eat enough to replace the calories that are burned during cardio. So you need to increase your overall consumption in order to compensate for that extra stuff. So if your cardio puts you into an accidental caloric deficit, your hypertrophy will stall. So you're you're eating extra to facilitate your hypertrophy, your muscle gain. But if your cardio is messing with that, it's eating that, it's consuming, it's burning that stuff as fuel before it has a chance to be used as building blocks for your muscles. So that's why that 6-hour gap is beneficial. It gives you enough time to start working on your hypertrophy gains, but you still need to be adjusting your diet accordingly so that you still have enough kilojoules over and above that in order to facilitate hypertrophy, which is why you want to be very careful about tracking your input and managing your measurables. So what I mean by that is you want to be tracking every meal down to as close as you possibly can to reality. So you're tracking your kilojoule input as well as your macronutrients, your protein, carbohydrates, fat, so that you have an idea of how much you're consuming. And then you want to be measuring your body composition as thoroughly as you can, as regularly as you can. For most of us, the only way we can do that on a daily basis or on a weekly basis is through weight. Weight, of course, remember, is not a very good measurement of your overall body composition, but it can be used as a proxy measurement for tracking things day to day. You can then use more sophisticated tools like some per scans have an acceptable margin of error for being able to detect and trace your body composition. So you can fill in that detail. So what you want to be doing ultimately is you want to be making sure that if you're trying for hypertrophy, you are not losing muscle mass. And if you are losing weight, or if you're keeping weight steady, that your body fat percentage is either remaining steady or decreasing. You don't want to be upsetting that apple cart. Making sure you have enough protein to sustain hypertrophy while still making gains, both in terms of resistance training and cardio training, is a balancing act that's going to engage your cognitive faculties. Next thing you need to bear in mind is consolidating the stress. So you want to be matching your hard days with hard days and your easy days with easy days. You do your high intensity zone 5 intervals on the same day as heavy leg day. It sounds counterintuitive, but in terms of recovery, this makes a lot of sense. What that means is you've got one brutally exhausting training day that you are completely wrecked at the end of that day, but it allows your subsequent rest days. So when you're in recovery the next day, it's going to be true full system recovery days, right? Because those systems are recovering independent of each other. Even though it's happening at the same time, the metabolic process is happening in your cardio recovery versus your resistance recovery is not the same. So you can just relax, do a little bit of zone 1 cardio to stimulate active recovery and chill. You don't have to worry about spacing out your difficult workouts day after day, because that also will, if you don't space it correctly, if you don't sync your high intensity workouts correctly, that's going to contribute to your cumulative CNS fatigue, which is more of a concern when it comes to resistance training than cardio, CNS, central nervous system fatigue. But that does build up over time. And although cardio training doesn't directly contribute to your central nervous system fatigue, it's not going to make it any easier if you're filling in your recovery days from resistance training with heavy cardio and staggering it in that way. So you want to try and make your heavy days and your light days light days. Okay. Those are the recovery and nutrition factors that we need to consider. Now let's talk about, to finish up, what are the forms of cardio training, the different versions that are available, and benefits and downsides of each, the modalities, choosing your vehicle. There is no single best form of cardiovascular training. The best one is the one that you're going to do consistently, whatever that is for you, given your constraints and your requirements. It aligns with your current physical limitations and your resistance training goals. The standard, the de facto, and it's the one that I keep coming back to in today's talk, is running. Running is the standard because it's the one that humans are most adapted for. It is the most natural form of human movement. Might not feel like it, especially if you're new to it, but it really is. And it requires minimal equipment. It's highly accessible. Anybody can do it. I mean, the equipment you need basically is just a pair of shoes to start off with. You can spend a lot of money on equipment for running if you want to, but even then, if you have a lot of money to spend on a hobby and running is your hobby, you're going to hit a ceiling for like how much money you can spend on shoes and tracking watches and that stuff. There's just only so much you can buy. It's highly accessible. Anybody can access it. You just step outside your front door and you can run. If you don't live in a safe neighborhood, then maybe you need to go to a nearby athletic place, park or something like that. But it should be relatively straightforward to find that, not too far away. Or a communal fitness event like a park run on a Saturday is accessible. And it provides an excellent cardiovascular stimulus. It's just really, really good as a cardio thing. The downside is that it's high impact. It's biometric. With every foot strike, your joints are going to be absorbing multiple times your body weight worth of stress. And if you are heavy, or if you have existing joint issues, it's going to make it more difficult for you to get going. Not that you can't do it, but it's going to be a long process to get yourself established in that activity. It just requires being intentional and careful about that kind of thing. Next one is cycling. So whether that's on a stationary bike, like at the gym or at home, or on an actual bike, cycling is zero impact. So it's not going to hurt your joints at all. And you can sit on a bike for hours at zone 2 without damaging your joints at all. It makes it highly compatible with heavy leg days in the gym. Downside is, well, there are two. One is cost. It can be very expensive to get into cycling. Stationary bikes are relatively inexpensive. If you have one at home, you can probably pick one up used for a couple $100. If you are a member of a commercial gym, there are plenty of bikes available there, and also things like spinning classes, which are nice. The other downside is that it is localized. So your fatigue is going to be focused on your quads and calves specifically. So not even your whole leg, just those specific parts of your leg. And it can make your legs feel heavy if you're not programmed correctly around your resistance training. So you need to be more intentional about how you link up your cycling with your resistance training. Swimming is another great one. What it does, the benefits there is that it completely removes the effects of gravity and impact. You're functionally weightless while you're in water, and it's a good full body workout. And it builds immense lung capacity because you have to hold your breath a lot. That's good training for that, and aids in active recovery. Downside is that it's very technical. It's a difficult skill to learn. Humans are not adapted for functioning in the water, so we have to learn a lot of stuff to make it work. And if your swimming technique is poor, you're going to be fighting the water. It's going to make it almost impossible to maintain a low heart rate. So staying in that zone 2 is going to be very difficult. And you get stuck in zone 4, 5, just trying to stay afloat. It also can be inaccessible for some people. Public pools are not available everywhere. Not all commercial gyms have a pool. So if you don't have access to a pool, or at least a pool of a decent size, it might be difficult to access swimming, but it's a good option. The other one is called rucking. I don't hear a lot of people calling it that here. I don't know if South African context has a different name for that, but rucking is essentially walking with a weighted backpack or vest. You'll see these weighted vests, or just walking with a laden backpack. It's quite popular in the military. I see a lot of people doing it there, and it's kind of billed as a hybrid activity. So it's intended to bridge the gap between resistance training and cardio. I'm not sure how well it really does that, but in principle, that's what it's supposed to do. What it does is it elevates your heart rate into zone 2, without even having to try too hard, right? Just because you're having to carry all that extra weight, it's going to push your heart rate up even while you're just walking. And then ostensibly it's building muscle, especially in your core stability, because you have to maintain the balance of this larger pack. Postural endurance, forcing you to learn how to sit up and stand up straight, and your lower body strength, because you have to lift more than your usual body weight as you're walking. It's functional training, and it's beneficial, like just in terms of learning to carry a heavy load in the field, right? The cons are that it requires a fair amount of equipment. But the golden rule with all of these modalities, okay, first of all, you don't have to pick one, right? These modalities, this is just 4 examples of many. And there's no reason why you can't mix and match them. If you want to run one day, cycle another day, row another day, swim another day, ruck another day, there's no reason why you can't do that. It's just important to understand the limitations of each one and how best to synchronize it with your resistance training so as not to compromise the results of either your cardio or of your resistance training. So just understanding how they work so that you can sync them up correctly. All right, golden rule is that consistency is more important than intensity. It's the 80-20 rule. The most common mistake that new athletes, new officers will make is treating every cardio session like it's a test of willpower. They'll go out and they'll run as hard as they can every single time, but this is a tactical error that's going to lead to system failure, CNS burnout, and injury. So the 80-20 distribution, which is polarized training, I mentioned that before, is intended for optimal adaptation. 80% of your total cardio training volume should be strictly low intensity, conversational, zone 2. Only 20% should be high intensity, zone 5. That makes it a lot more sustainable. Avoiding the gray zone, you don't want to fall into the zone 3 or 4 trap. And remembering that exercising discipline means going slowly. Even if it feels like you're going too slowly, feels like you're not working hard enough, zone 2 is where you want to be a significant amount of the time. It takes a profound emotional discipline to intentionally go slower than you're capable of. But you need to trust the process, keep the easy days genuinely easy so that you have the physical and mental reserves to make the hard days genuinely hard. In conclusion, resistance training builds the starship's hull and tactical systems, but cardiovascular training is the warp core. A strong ship isn't useful if it runs out of power halfway through the mission. Choose to build your engines. Okay. Let's see, comments, questions. I see I've got a couple from YouTube. First one is from Master Chief Kotzer. Parkruns should have difficulty ratings. In essence, parkruns do. I don't think it's official or that it's required from most parkruns, but a lot of parkruns that I've been to have what they call a seeding process at the beginning. So they will call out and say, if you are the kind of runner who's likely to complete today in under 20 minutes, go to the front. Then once all the sub 20 runners are at the front, then they'll say, okay, now the sub 25s go to the front, and now the sub 30s and the sub 35s and so on, so that at least at the beginning, you don't have the fast runners tripping over and dodging between and falling over the slow runners as they get to their right pace. After the first few minutes, everybody's kind of thinned out to where they should be based on their level of activity and their level of difficulty. But it's those first couple 100 meters that can be quite challenging, especially if the parkrun has a relatively narrow track. So seeding, which is a thing that a lot of parkruns do, helps to manage that. After that, it doesn't really matter that much because you're just quickly running past slow people if you've got a multi-loop parkrun like I do, or if you've just got a single loop parkrun, you don't even see those slow runners again until you get to the end. All right, let's see. All right, here's from Lieutenant Davis. Hot tip, listen to music within a certain BPM range, otherwise you'll hurt yourself because you started sprinting without realizing. Yes, okay, so this relates to listening to music while you're running and helping to use the tempo of the music to track your running speed. And Lieutenant Davis is quite right about this. So if you are sort of person who can get lost in the music, if you're sort of musically inclined, your body will want to sync up your steps with the natural tempo of the movement. And if you are careless in selecting the music that you listen to, you can choose a song that's either too fast, which then sort of tricks you into running too fast, or too slow, so that you're losing speed. If you're going to listen to music, you should be mindful of the speed or the beats per minute of that song so that you're not tricking yourself into running the wrong pace. Okay, next. All right, from Commander Shimali, they're lying. This was about the runner's high lie. Um, yes, some of us have yet to experience the runner's high just because we've never broken through that initial resistance, that feeling of your body fighting back against you. You kind of need to be at a certain fitness level in order for that effect to kick in so that you can actually experience it, especially on a shorter run like a 5K. You might not even have enough time in the space of a 5K run to break through that wall and experience the runner's high. Longer runs, typically half marathons and longer, are where these kinds of experiences are reported most often. But some people report never experiencing that runner's high. They never have that experience of euphoria. So there seems to be a fair amount of individual difference from person to person. Okay, next. Another from Commander Shimali. My elbows hate added weights, pull specifically, I think. Always feel like I try to rip them off, but it's truly horrible. Any tips for that? Do not for that not to happen, or is it just bait fuss? Bait fuss means just hold on, it's going to be okay. Elbows hate added weights. On the pull specifically, okay. So what that sounds like is a particular kind of fatigue, possibly as a result of an old injury, or maybe it's just your sort of tendons and that kind of thing that are rebelling. What I would suggest doing, instead of pushing up the weight on in a situation like that, I would suggest going higher reps. So keep the weight relatively low at a sort of comfortable weight range, and then instead of doing 10 or 12 reps until failure, keep going, like 14 reps, 18 reps, 20 reps. Once you're getting up to like the 30 reps at the lower weight, it should be a lot easier to push up to a higher weight, even if the reps are still high. Except, in fact, for some muscle groups, it's kind of a necessity to keep your weights low and your reps high. Delts, especially when you're doing lateral raises, the muscles just can't accommodate very much weight. So you have to keep your weights low on a lateral raise and keep your reps high if you want to build anything. Even somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you look at the photos of him doing lateral raises, he's only ever doing them with low rates, like less than 10 kilos per hand, because those muscles simply can't accommodate big weights. You have to go low weight, high reps for that kind of thing. Another one from Commander Shimali. I usually go to failure because I can't count. That's fine. Keeping low weights and then going to failure because you're just pushing a lot of times, that's perfectly acceptable. Doesn't hurt to try and keep track of your rep count if you can. There are gadgets that you can get now. I haven't seen them in real life, but I've seen them advertised online. It's basically just a little motion sensor, typically with a magnet on it. You can just clip onto the weight and then it will count the reps for you. I haven't tested them myself, but it looks like a cool thing. I used to be able to do that with a previous version of my PerScan, but that doesn't seem to work anymore for some reason. I think it's built into the Android or OS operating system. The apps can no longer access the accelerometer in that way or something like that. But it used to be very cool back in the day when that was possible. All right, I think that is all we need to cover. So I'm going to go through. Okay, I've got a more comprehensive. Oh, here we go. From Commander Shimali. My trainer keeps count usually, but he only counts off every rep. Yeah, okay. So if you're working with a trainer, yes, they'll probably be helping you to track your reps, but I would suggest every other rep, yes, because if you don't do the rep completely, he's not going to count it. You have to do the whole thing. But I would, if you're working with a trainer, tell him that I suggested keeping the weights low so as to not stress the elbows too much, and then that should allow them to adapt over time. Okay. I have a closing statement, which I should have said earlier, but I'm going to say it now. Resistance training is the structural maintenance program for the human body. It builds the starship's hull and tactical systems, but cardiovascular training is the warp core. A heavily armored ship is of no use to Starfleet. If it runs out of power halfway through the mission, you need the structural integrity to withstand the friction, but you need the entire engine capacity to keep moving forward. Do not neglect your engines. Choose to build the stamina required to serve as the best officer that you can be. And to finish, I leave you with this thought. Reality is ruthless to the fragile. Stop negotiating with your own comfort. Build the engine. and make yourself impossible to break. The mission will not wait for you to catch your breath. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.
The Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer?
Okay.
Do you have what it takes